Andy Mitchell, thanks very much for joining me this morning. Since the coronavirus lockdown first came about, the CLC has really come into its own. Here at BMA, we're very aware of what's been done, but our members perhaps less so. So can you describe the activities of the council in the last few months and how it's gone, how you've gone about that work?
Well, certainly, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me here as well. Yeah, so I mean, the CLCs existed for quite a while, and the challenges that the industry have faced around net zero and building safety and skills and innovation and technology, they've been there for some while. And we were working our way through how do we pull that to make that relevant for people. But of course, the pandemic changed everything. Really, what we did in the very first instance back in March was just, I called a group of people, representative bodies, to say, can we get together and talk? Because we've got a big problem here, and what happened was a lot of people said, yes, let's try, let's see what we can do, and you've got to go right back to the beginning and realize this was all about how do we stop safely, how do we consider restarting. The site operating procedures about working with COVID all came out of that early phase. And what we found was, and that was we were having daily meetings, an hour a day, with people from across the industry talking about the different problems and challenges that we had, and whether that was payments or whether that was materials. And it really was a sort of day by day, what are we dealing with? It was hand to mouth. It was very immediate, very tactical. But it seemed that was what was needed. But what we did from there is start building a momentum and actually a habit of, as an industry, talking to each other about what our issues were. And that's something I've not seen before. And the more we did it, the more it became apparent that there was value in this. And people kept turning up every day for the calls and kept putting their hand up to say, yeah, I think I can do something about this. So, yes, clearly pandemic, an awful thing for the country and a lot of people, but it has been an impetus for the industry to actually get together, and that's massively encouraging.
And what do you think the lasting changes for the CLC will be as you look to reinvent construction?
Well, I think there's no doubt we've moved on. There's no doubt the industry is more coherent. I've heard a lot of people in government groups, one way or another, saying that they're seeing something they never thought they'd see in the industry, which is much more a common voice and a cohesion and all of that, and we mustn't lose that. I don't think there's any need to, but we're going to have to work hard to make sure that we stay as close and as visible as we are to each other. So I think what we've got now is a platform where, the fact that you and I are talking, we didn't know each other, and I'm not sure how we would ever have got to meet each other in a previous world. And we've got to keep that, and we've got to keep that connectivity, because the challenge is, the whole industry recovery plan, the restart, reset, reinvent, three very clear phases. The restart was just doing what we're doing now, which is hanging on in here and keeping the industry alive. And the reset really about looking at the future pipeline and what have we got to do, working with government to get things changed to keep that going. And the reinvent really is getting back to the challenges that we had pre-COVID, which was how do we do things differently, addressing all of the needs, and they're still there. But I think we're in a much better place now, and I have a lot more. I think we have a lot more credibility as an industry. Yes, the CLC, but I think it's actually the industry more broadly, and we've got to build on that.
And our credibility as an industry demonstrated by the fact that the Prime Minister, made remarks about construction specifically. as he announced the new lockdown measures in England, saying the construction industry must continue, and that's by virtue of the organisation work, I think. We, as I mentioned, we just entered a new lockdown in England, a new national lockdown. In what ways do you think the experience is going to be different from that in May?
Well, I think, as you just said, the fact that the Prime Minister, in his very first announcement about the new lockdown, very clearly said construction and manufacturing must continue. That clarity wasn't there at the beginning. We've all learned a lot more about how do we work, whether that's in our manufacturing centres or whether that's working on site or in people's homes. We've got recognised procedures and processes for the different parts of the industry. And I think there is also a broader recognition for everybody that we have to keep the economy going, and where we can, we need to. And I think all of those things are different. And so I think we're in a very different place. The fact that when the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister said construction keeps going, and the fact that people have said, well, yes, naturally, we can and we will, and we've proven we can do this safely. And we know what the issues are, and we understand. We talk about vulnerable people, but we know what that means, whereas that was a bit confusing as to what that meant before. So in a very different place, there's every reason to believe that we can keep going. And for sure, if you're fitting bathrooms in a home, then we've all got to understand what does that mean for the people living in their home, and what is their condition, and actually is this the right thing to do, and if it is, then what steps are we going to take? And it's a way more logical, rational conversation, which understandably wasn't there back in March.
It's about risk management, isn't it? And taking a sensible approach. Just stepping back to the reinventing construction discussion, what do you think the wider construction industry is looking for from suppliers like BMA's members?
Well, I think if you go back to the let's take the net zero piece as a good example. There's no doubt every single part of the industry needs to understand its role in this. And I think for me, there's a couple of steps here. Is okay. First is the understanding of what are we trying to do. We talk about net zero 2050. Well, that's so far away, and it's such a big single statement. It doesn't mean anything in any individual case. So we've got to work backwards to say, so what that means for your sector, for bathrooms, is this, and it's got to be about materials mostly. So what does that mean? What materials do we use? What materials do we need to use in the future? And I think that's not going to happen overnight, but that's part of what we've got to do. And I think for you folk, this is about saying, right, this is what we do at the moment. We can see that there are different directions we can go. I mean, ultimately, what I'm trying to do is get the multiple strands of the industry understanding, well, we could do this, but the implications are this, and some things aren't going to make sense. And it's about deciding, well, yes, you could do that, but the costs or the practicalities just mean it's not worthwhile. But this is something you can do. And I'm sure for the bathroom sector, this is about materials as much as anything. And how do they fit in a it's not just the bathroom, it's how does that fit in the whole house? What are we trying to do with the whole house? And therefore, what is the role of these particular rooms in the house, and how does that fit in with systems? So, material point of view, there's a technical issue around how do homes of the future work, and what we've got to do is figure out, well, what does that mean for you? And as I say, we're not going to fix that overnight, but I think that's where the challenge is. So, so for you guys. But what I'm really pleased is that, as I said, we're talking, and when we're talking about innovation in the industry, what we've got to make sure of is that innovation is relevant to you. And to the extent that you could do this if only this innovation was to happen, well, we need to know that so we can put that on the table and say, well, where does that fit, and is that part of the solution? And so the visibility, the communication, the awareness of the role that we all have in this, the recognition that we do all have a role, I think is a really important one. And that, I think that is progress that we've made. And I think it's now about, right, this reinvent phase we talked about a year onwards, but we're talking about the next 10 years, and that's quite exciting.
Yeah. Andy, I wanted to talk to you about the CLC, obviously, but that's actually a voluntary role, and I just wanted to, for a second, turn to your day job at Tideway. We've got big interest in water, as you might imagine. Most of our products rely on a good, secure supply of water to function. Tell us about the Tideway project as one of the few major pieces of water infrastructure construction underway at the moment.
So Tideway is here to solve a big sewage pollution problem in the River Thames. Fundamentally, the existing sewage system of London is working perfectly. Sir Joseph Bazalgette did a cracking job 150, 70 years ago, or whatever it was. But quite simply, there are more people in London than ever before. More of the ground surfaces have been tarmacked and concreted over, so the natural drainage isn't there. So more water ends up in the drains, which is the sewer system, because that's how it was designed. And we're seeing more erratic weather conditions, and all of that means that Bazalgette's system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is when it gets full, the sewage has got to go somewhere. It's either in the streets or it's in the river, and it goes to the river. So our job is to intercept these multiple spill points up and down the river by building shafts down which we can channel what would have gone into the river, connect that to the big long tunnel that we're building under the river, and take it all the way down to Beckton ultimately for treatment. So we're about 60% complete. We've got quite a bit of the tunneling done, quite a few we've got 20 sites up and down the river, and they're all progressing well. We're over 60% complete. We've got really 2 more years of big work, and then we start pulling the system together. We believe when we're done, the river could be cleaner than it's been in 250 years, really before humanity came along and does what humanity does to the environment typically. 40 million tons of untreated sewage a year goes into the Thames, and we'll stop that. So it's a moment in time for London, and we get that. We know that we're playing a part in London's history, and that's all part of what gets us excited about what we do. But it's a big pipe, basically. It's a very simple system. The only pumps are the ones down at the far end, 80 meters below ground. It's a gravity system. It will work as long as gravity prevails, which we're confident it will. So it's a big cleanup job. We're about the 40th city in the world to do this. Many other projects around this country and around the world doing very similar things, because their systems are designed in the same way as ours.
And I've seen recently there's a new reservoir being planned down in Portsmouth area, but there's a much larger need for investment in water management, isn't there? I just wondered if you had any views on that, and perhaps any of the lessons that you've learned on the Tideway project.
Yeah, I think what's clear is we've got to be more careful about water. You can't change the way our entire network or sewage network works, but the concept of taking perfectly good rainwater, mixing it with the sewage, taking it to somewhere, and then putting energy in to take the water out of the sewage, it's just illogical. It is how it is, and it's how pretty much it works all around the world. But being more intelligent with water is something we're going to have to do. And And you could easily imagine that globally, if you look at some of the conflicts around the world in the past, perhaps being driven by oil, you can absolutely see conflicts in the future being driven by water and water availability. And I really hope that future generations see water in a different way. So I think there's a lot to do, as weather conditions will change anyway, and we're seeing the urbanization, the fact that a lot of people want to work in bigger cities, not just London, but anywhere, and therefore changing patterns of where people are, and therefore water needs. So I think it's a holistic view that we need as a country, in terms of how we treat, how we handle water, where does it fall naturally, and how do we get it to where people want to be. Is a big, it's a big nationwide system, really. But I think what we're doing with Tideway is, I think we're making a pretty good fist of it. We're doing the job well. It's under control. It involves so many parties. The 8 million people in London that, in amongst whom we've got to work, we need their permission to do it, albeit a sort of social acceptance. So all the relevant parties, Thames Water, who will ultimately receive what we're building back into their network, but with the Environment Agency, with DEFRA, with all the politicians up and down, it's a huge coordination effort, and sometimes I think the engineering is the easy bit.
So partnerships is the order of the day.
You have to do this, yeah.
Just wanted to finish up by congratulating you on becoming Building Personality of the Year. That was a big surprise.
Yeah, well, it was, and I felt a bit odd about accepting it, and I've been very keen to say, look, I'm taking one for the team here, because this has been a massive team effort. And really, I think what's being recognized is that the industry has come together. In a lot of ways, I look at it as I happen to be the one holding the parcel when the music stopped. It needed to happen, and I'm very pleased to have played my part. But you've got to recognize that this is a total industry effort, and we should genuinely all be proud of how we've risen to the challenge.
Well, very humble, Andy, but it was well deserved. So congratulations, and thanks very much for being so generous with your time this morning as well.
Oh, you're welcome. Pleasure to talk to you, Tom.